I think that Marshall is exactly the kind of team that Notre Dame needs to play a week after Ohio State. And what I mean by that is it's a game you're highly likely to win.
Mm-hmm.
It's also not a cakewalk team. Like, I don't want to play some FCS team because I feel like you're not going to really learn enough about how you've responded. Your body language could be bad. Your execution could be bad. You could not make any of the improvements you need to make. And if you play the same way you did against Ohio State against some teams, UNLV, for example, you're still going to stomp them and you're not going to learn anything. I feel like with Marshall, kind of like Toledo last year, if you try and sleepwalk through this game, they're going to jump up and bite you. I think they're also good enough in some specific areas that we'll kind of get into during the show that are going to test Notre Dame to see just how much you've improved. So I think the timing of this Marshall game is going to end up being something that's definitely a positive for Notre Dame.
And I think that you're going to see a lot of the same qualities on the schedule that get you worried at some points, right? Like you're going to see for Marshall, not diving too much into it, but you're going to see some perimeter ability from their wide receivers. You're going to see the ability to work in space. You're going to see some good defensive players, if I'm being completely honest, and you're going to see some size at the offensive line, right? So I agree, Brian. I mean, I commented on it yesterday that I think there are several players in this Marshall team that are probably better than what we would typically think of as Marshall level players. Like I think there's a couple that can play decently high level of football. So I'm looking forward to it, man. Because again, it's not a cupcake. It's not a cakewalk. Notre Dame needs to come out and play hard or else Marshall's going to be able to keep it close for a little bit. I think ultimately they're just so much more talented that they should win this one relatively easy, but Notre Dame needs to show that they have a little bit of that gut check moments. And it's kind of like, hey man, yes, last week stunk. It stinks to lose a close game, but hey, let's come back and let's give our A game this next week. That's big.
Because ultimately, Ryan, that's what matters most about this matchup with Marshall. It's not so much the win, because they'll win. It's not so much about the margin of victory. It's not so much about a lot of the different aspects that we've talked about. It's about, I think you nailed it. It's about, okay, how are you going to respond? Right. And I'm going to have my midweek musings coming out here after the show at some point in time. It'll come out later this afternoon. And, one of the themes from it is we're going to learn a lot about this Notre Dame football team this week. We're going to learn a lot about them from the standpoint of, what kind of character do they have as a football team? What kind of leadership do they have from a coaching standpoint? What kind of leadership do they have from a player standpoint? What is this team made of? Because what this team is made of is going to tell us how much they're able to come out and play to their potential. Because I don't expect the team to be full throttle in week 2. I mean, that does take time. I mean, there's a reason why some teams have looked really bad in September or not, maybe not as good in September. Clemson in 2018, that team that we've talked about was so good. They weren't that good in the first 4 or 5 games of the year. They were good, but they didn't look like the team that they were in November and then, of course, in the playoff, because they were a young team that was still evolving as a team. And now this is not a young team per se, at least it's not on defense, but the offense is a young team. You have a sophomore quarterback. You have 2 sophomore running backs as part of your 3-man rotation. Your top receiver is a sophomore. You have 2 sophomores starting the offensive line. Now, that's not an excuse for how you played on Saturday, right? Because you're the starters. It's just pointing to the fact of it's not a justification for why you're losing, but it is saying it is going to take you a little time to reach your peak, right? And so, but what do you do as a young offense, for example? Because we're going to start off with the offensive conversation here first. But what do you do as an offense from a leadership standpoint? If Jarrett Patterson can't go, Avery Davis isn't on your team now. Who steps up as that leader and says, hey, you know what? What we did Saturday, not good enough. It's not on Coach Reese. It's not on Coach Freeman. It's not on Coach Easton. It's on us, right? And that's what you want to see. Now, we could sit there and argue around, well, no, the coaches are ultimately responsible. They're the coaches. That's how you and I look at it because we are former coaches. But I want to see that leadership from the players say, fellas, no. We don't need Coach Reese to put his foot up our butts. Who's the offensive lineman? Is it Josh Lugg? Is it Zeke Correll? Is it Andrew Kristofic? Who, if Jarrett Patterson can't play, says, hey, no. We don't need Coach Easton to rip our butts today. We should be more pissed about our performance than he is, right? That's the character that I want to see from this football team. And if they're going to bounce back from this game in a way, Ryan, that kind of tells us, okay, this team's got a little something, we're gonna see that. And that's really the thing that I'm most looking forward to seeing on Saturday is as we we'll dive into the matchups and we'll get into all the the specifics of this matchup or that matchup or whatever the case may be. But that's the thing right now, more than anything, Ryan, that's that you can't quantify with the statistic, and you're not going to be able to quantify it afterwards with a statistic because you are the far superior team. It's going to be about just watching the game and being like, okay, this team played with a little bit of an edge today, and that tells me something about Notre Dame.
It's what we call self accountability, man. We need
Mm-hmm.
to see these guys kind of take that onus on themselves. I agree with you completely, Brian, because this is one of those things where I think we remembered, was it last week or the week before? I can't remember. I talked a little bit about Kyron Williams was kind of that spark, right? Like he was
Mm-hmm.
kind of that emotional leader. You kind of fed off him if you're Notre Dame offensive player and Notre Dame defensive player for that matter. Who's that guy on this team right now? I think there's a few guys that can be that guy, but as of right now, I'm still kind of waiting to see like who is that leader on both
Right.
sides of the ball that they're just he walks in the room, he tells you to get your stuff together, and you get your stuff together. Like that
Right.
is the difference, the tone setter, if you want to call him that. And this game, it can be tough. This type of game can be tough because whether it's drilled into them every single day throughout the week, which I'm sure it will be, it's still you're at Notre Dame and you're playing a Marshall team, right?
Yep.
Where you're going to look at them and you're going to say, in your minds, even if it's not on the top of your mind, even if it's not consciously, you're going to think, I'm a better football player than them, right?
Yeah.
We're a better football team than that team. We have all
Right.
that understanding. And you can go into that game, and I think you can take people for granted, obviously, right? And we've already mentioned it. Marshall has some good football players, and you can't take them for granted. I think what does help Notre Dame, though, Brian, in my opinion, is that sometimes these scrappy teams do not have the guys that look the part, at times, and
Mm-hmm.
they kind of take you off guard. Marshall has some guys that look the part,
Yeah.
like Corey Gabbage is 6'4", 220-pound wide receiver. Ethan
Yeah.
Driscoll, great last name, by the way, is 6'9", 314 pounds, right? Like, Isaiah Foskey's going to line up against Ethan Driscoll and be like, oh, okay, like that's
I better
a
bring my
Division
A
One
game
offensive
today.
lineman. Yeah, that's a Division
Right.
One offensive lineman. I need to play hard here.
Right.
Corey Gammage is going to line up across from Cam Hart and be like, oh, okay, yeah, I actually kind of need to play here today, right? So
Right.
I think there's going to be kind of a remembering factor for this team that's like, oh, well, wait, no, this team's pretty good. Like we're not playing just a rollover cupcake. Like this team
Right.
has Division One players, they have good football players, and they have guys that look the part. So looking forward to it, man. I am, because I mean, I look forward to every single game day as a fan and as an analyst. But I'm looking forward to this one because I said it yesterday. It's a gut check, man. It is.
Yeah.
Like Notre Dame could easily walk into this game if you don't have great leadership and just kind of mail it in and just be like, oh, we're just going to do the minimum to win this football game. But I don't think that's what these coaches, I don't think that's what is on this coaching staff. I don't think it's what's on this team. And if they are the team that we think that they can be, because again, no moral victories, right?
Right.
Notre Dame lost the football game against Ohio State, and they need to win that football game. There's no
Which
more
could have
victories
won.
to that.
Could have won.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. The one silver lining is that you know that you can compete with that
Yeah.
team. You know that you belong there.
Ryan,
right?
there are
You
past
know
Notre
that.
Dame teams that if they'd have played against a team like Ohio State the way that team played, they'd have got blown out, which again speaks
Yes.
to this team has more talent than people realize.
Yeah.
They had to, I mean, they made plays on Saturday based on really good scheme defensively, but also some talent. And, that's the thing that we're going to have to find out. So.